I'm here with Michael Gableman, a former Wisconsin Supreme Court justice who appears in the new film Rigged, talking about the 2020 election and the ways that Mark Zuckerberg used his money to influence it. So, Mr. Gableman, thank you for being here. The first thing I want to ask you is, in the film, you discuss Zuckerberg, obviously, his plot to use his money to kind of influence the election. And specifically, you talk about how he did this under the guise of COVID and using COVID and saying we need more election options for these people who can't show up to the polls because of COVID. But you said in the film there was sort of a bait and switch of sorts. Can you explain what you mean by that and kind of what happened?
It was a bait and switch. And I think what's very important for our audience to understand is that although you're right, Zuckerberg used his money, he couldn't have done it without also using the people who ran the 5 largest cities in the state of Wisconsin. That is the mayors. I always make a minor exception for an exception for the city of Kenosha, because Kenosha's been pretty cooperative with us. But Milwaukee and Madison and Racine and Green Bay, those mayors, Eric Genrich in Green Bay, Corey Mason and Racine, they sold authority, they sold power that wasn't theirs to sell. They rented out their offices to Mark Zuckerberg and became willing accomplices in his desire to defeat President Trump and elect Joe Biden. That's really what the money was about. And if it was just using money to promote voting as a general idea, I wouldn't have much to say. But what it was a Democrat controlled, and that's David Plouffe, former top 2 political advisor to Barack Obama. He controlled Mark Zuckerberg's political operations, and that's what this was. And in 2016, it was David Plouffe who said that the reason that Hillary lost is because she didn't spend enough time in states like Wisconsin, and she didn't do enough to get out the African American vote, and that it was a matter of life and death. Later on, he wrote, it's a matter of life and death to defeat President Trump. And so what did he do? He came to Wisconsin and he spent Zuckerberg's money with the very, very willing cooperation of several of our mayors, most notably Eric Genrich in Green Bay and Corey Mason in Racine, who took the lead on this scheme. And they told their citizens, the mayors did, that this was going to be to protect them from COVID, when in fact less than 1% of the money, less than 1% of the $10 million that they took went to COVID safety. The rest went, now this is getting back to David Plouffe and his observations both after 2016 as well as in his book that he wrote in the summer of 2019, but published in 2020, very subtly called A Citizen's Guide to Beating Donald Trump. He needed to turn out the African American vote. Why? Because the statistics show us that when African Americans vote, they tend to vote at least 86% of the time for the Democrat candidate. Joe Biden was not catching fire with anybody. He was nobody's first choice. That was obvious. So they had to gin up a get out the vote campaign. Get out the vote is a partisan term of art. It's short for get out the vote of the voters who are likely to support our candidate. That's why I say that David Plouffe, using $330 million of Mark Zuckerberg's money, was able to come to Wisconsin with about $10 million of it and use the mayor's authority to take over the clerk's office. We had the specter and the shame, really the shame, of partisan Mark Zuckerberg employees all committed to defeating President Trump.